Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Portland. My name is Patty Bedient, Club President, and I'd like to give a special welcome to the guests in the audience, as well as those listening on radio and watching on television. The future of the city is at the heart of the City Club. Today we have the opportunity to hear about the views of proponents and opponents of Ballot Measure 9. Ballot Measure 9 would declare homosexuality abnormal behavior. With us today, to my far right, are Scott Lively, Communications Director of the Oregon Citizens Alliance, and to my near right, Charles Hinkle, partner in the law firm of Stoll, Reeves, Boley, Jones, and Gray, past president of the ACLU, as well as an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. The text of the Ballot Measure 9 ballot title reads as follows: Shall Constitution be amended to require that all governments discourage homosexuality, other listed behaviors, and not facilitate or recognize them? Our program today will have several sections. First, each speaker will give a 5-minute opening statement. A coin toss held earlier this week determined the order of appearance for our debate. Following the opening statements, speakers will each have 4 questions that they will ask of each other. Then they will respond to questions from our City Club panel. Our questioners today are members of the program committee, Joanne Allen, Development Director for the Black United Fund of Oregon, and Alan Hunt, Executive Director for Rosemont School. Questions were submitted in advance of the meeting in writing by members of the City Club of Portland. A special subcommittee from the club's program committee has selected the questions for today. These are the only questions that will be asked today, and there will be no questions from the floor. The speakers have not seen the questions in advance. Each speaker will have 1 minute to respond to the question. Our timer, also seated here at the table, is Jolene Clausen, Neighborhood Coordinator for Neighbors West Northwest, also from our program committee. Following the panel questioning, each speaker will have 3 minutes for a closing statement. This meeting will be governed by the program format that I've just described and by the rules of conduct, which are displayed on all of your tables. The program will adjourn at 1:15. I would now like to ask each of the speakers to approach their podiums, and we will begin with opening statements. The first opening statement will be by Charles Hinkle, followed by Scott Lively.
Thank you, Patty. Throughout our history, we Americans have been struggling to move away from the stereotypes and prejudices that divide us toward a society where the dignity and worth of every human being is honored and respected. That is what the gay rights movement has been about, the struggle to obtain the right to have a job free from discrimination based on one's sexual orientation, a basic right that every American should be able to take for granted. But the Oregon Citizens Alliance says no to equal rights. In Bend and LeGrand and Medford today, private employers are permitted under the law to fire persons simply because they are gay, and the OCA wants to keep it that way. They are waging a cultural war, they tell us. It is a war to impose upon all Oregonians their particular religious viewpoint on all the social issues of the day. 2 years ago, they tried to amend the Constitution to incorporate their religious views on abortion. They lost. Now they seek to put their religious views about homosexuality into that same Constitution. They have written a measure so broad and vague that they disagree among themselves about what it means, but one thing they do concede, that the language of Measure 9, if literally applied, would violate the First Amendment. It would prohibit political marches in the public streets in support of gay rights. It would require librarians to remove from their shelves any books that portray gay persons in a sympathetic light. It would require college teachers to eliminate from their classes any material concerning gay persons unless it condemned them as abnormal and perverse. It would cause high school teachers to lose their jobs if they dared to write a letter to the editor in favor of gay rights. The OCA tries to downplay these drastic consequences, and they are supporting their proposal now with a campaign of distortion and falsehood. In a letter to contributors last July, they said that if Measure 9 is defeated, homosexual marriages will become legal and all opposition to homosexuality will be punishable by law. That is false. Last week, they issued a press release claiming that the Union of Orthodox Rabbis endorsed Measure 9. That was false. They have said that Bill Clinton endorses their views, implying that he supports Measure 9. That is false. Remember these distortions and falsehoods today when you hear Scott Lively talk about Project 10 and about Portland Future Focus. Remember them when you hear him use his favorite scare words, militant homosexuals, and quotas, and affirmative action. Remember them especially when you hear him talk about pedophilia. For despite all the evidence that sexual abuse of children is overwhelmingly a heterosexual phenomenon, 60% of which occurs within the family unit itself, according to CSD, the OCA wants you to believe that civil rights protection for gays and lesbians will somehow promote pedophilia. That is a lie. They know that pedophilia is a crime in Oregon. They know that nothing in Measure 9 will change that fact one way or another. But never mind. They hope that if they take those two words, homosexuality and pedophilia, and repeat them together often enough, people will ignore the facts and vote their fears. It is a war they are waging, all right, and truth was the first casualty. The rest of the country is reacting with dismay and disbelief that such a thing could be happening in our state. We know already that Portland will lose 5 major conventions if this measure passes, hurting dozens of small businesses from caterers to cab drivers, and that's just the tip of the economic iceberg. That's why Associated Oregon Industries, the Portland Chamber of Commerce, the American Electronics Association, countless other business leaders and industry groups are saying, please, Oregon, don't shoot yourself in your economic foot. Vote no on 9. The OCA has raised hundreds of thousands of dollars to promote this tragic and divisive measure that is tearing Oregon apart, money that could have been well spent fighting the real problems that face Oregon families, drug abuse and alcoholism, inadequate health care, gang violence, child abuse. Instead, they are using it to urge Oregonians to put a constitutional stamp of approval on discrimination. Let us hope and pray that voters on Election Day will remember that old commandment that we are to love our neighbors as ourselves, that we will vote our hopes, not our fears, our ideals, not our prejudices, and say no to Measure 9.
Mr. Lively, your opening statement, please.
Thank you. My name is Scott Lively. I am the Communications Director for the No Special Rights Committee. I'm here today representing not just the No Special Rights Committee, but also the 626,000 Oregonians who voted against special rights for homosexuals in 1988. Despite the fact that we represented a 54% majority of the voters, our public officials, notably Governor Barbara Roberts, Mayor Bud Clark, and members of the Portland City Council, continued to push for special rights for homosexuals across the board, and since 1988, they have been working behind the scenes with remarkable success. Multnomah County has accepted a domestic partnership agreement that gives the same health benefits to homosexual live-in lovers that families have, and funds it with taxpayer money. The Oregon Department of Education has introduced AIDS education into our schools that defends homosexuality as just another lifestyle and condemns what it calls homophobia. The Portland City Council last year voted in a law extending civil rights minority status to homosexuals and has now followed it up with the Portland Future Focus Plan, which calls verbatim for affirmative action and hiring guidelines for homosexuals in every city agency. I suggest that these advances of the homosexual rights agenda in Oregon, in defiance of the will of the people as revealed in 1988 and reaffirmed this May in Springfield, demonstrates the power of the homosexual lobby and the enormous influence that it wields over our public officials. Is it simply coincidence that the largest campaign contribution to Governor Roberts in her 1990 gubernatorial race was from the Homosexual Right to Privacy PAC? Is it coincidence that John Baker, the former head of the Right to Privacy PAC, who made that contribution, has since been appointed to a high-ranking post in the Department of Transportation? Is it coincidence that Mayor Bud Clark's largest campaign contribution also came from the Right to Privacy PAC? Is it coincidence that every other voting member of the Portland City Council has received significant contributions from the Right to Privacy PAC? Is it coincidence that the author of the sexual orientation law that the City Council passed was written by Keiston Lowry, a sitting board member on the Right to Privacy PAC, who also happens to be an aide to Mike Lindbergh? Ladies and gentlemen, if any other special interest lobby were so deeply entrenched in our public policy decision-making process, the media and the watchdog groups would cause such a stink that the scandal would be talked about for decades. A few weeks ago, my friend Sonny died of AIDS. He was 41. Sonny had been a homosexual for 20 years before he contracted the disease. After he learned that he had AIDS, Sonny renounced the homosexual lifestyle and became a Christian. I met Sonny at my church, where he had come for support after his former homosexual friends had gotten him fired from his position as an apartment manager. Sonny was in the later stages of the disease. He had no money. He had nowhere to go. He was terrified to go to one of the government AIDS houses because he didn't want to be around people who were practicing homosexuality anymore or promoting the gay rights philosophy. I talked with my wife, and even though we were afraid of the disease, we agreed to ask Sonny to come and live with us so that he could have a family environment to live in and so that we could help him fulfill his wish to die in his own bed. Sonny lived in our home for about a year, and we came to love him. I spent many hours talking with Sonny as he grew weaker. He told me that he had become a homosexual because he had been raped by a man when he was 7 years old. He told me all about the gay lifestyle, the perversions, the gay bars, things that most people would not believe. Sonny got AIDS because he was practicing homosexual behavior. He wasn't born that way, as he would tell anyone who would listen. Sonny called it a sexual addiction. My last conversation with Sonny was about a television commercial he wanted to do to warn young people to avoid the homosexual lifestyle. That very night, Sonny was rushed to the hospital with complications, and he died shortly thereafter. I offer you Sonny's message. Please, let's not allow the homosexual political influence to normalize homosexuality to our children. Thank you.
Thank you. If both of our speakers would go to their podiums, please, we'll start the question section of our debate. And during this portion of the program, each speaker will ask 4 questions of the other. The question must be asked in 30 seconds. The opponent will have 1 minute to respond, after which the questioner will have 1 minute for rebuttal. The role of questioner will alternate between the 2 speakers, and we'll start with Mr. Hinkle. Mr. Hinkle, your first question.
You speak of special rights. Oregon law currently prohibits employment discrimination on the basis of marital status, which means that you can't be fired because you're divorced. Do you think this gives special rights to divorced persons?
No, I don't.
And I have a minute to respond to that?
You have a minute to respond.
Well, all right. What the gay rights agenda is intended to do with respect to job discrimination is to put sexual orientation in there right alongside marital status. Now, why is it that if you are a divorced person, that doesn't give you special rights? That's a matter of choice, and I remind you, Scott, that divorce is condemned more emphatically by Jesus. He doesn't even mention homosexuality. Divorce is condemned by Jesus. He says if you're a divorced person and you remarry, you are committing adultery. Adultery is a capital offense in the book of Deuteronomy. Why is it that divorced persons, a matter of choice, a matter of conduct, a matter of behavior, why isn't that special rights when we allow divorced persons simply to have job protections, but somehow it becomes special rights when we say let's give job protection to gays and lesbians? It doesn't make any sense.
Mr. Lively, your first question for Mr. Hinkle.
Mr. Hinkle, if the logic behind giving civil rights protections to homosexuals is based on their sexual feelings toward someone of the same gender and not their behavior, why shouldn't we also give civil rights protections to people who are sexually oriented toward children as long as they don't act on their feelings?
I think that we should. I would fully subscribe, fully support to giving full civil rights protections to anybody, regardless of their feelings, if they're not breaking any laws. Pedophilia is a crime. It has always been a crime in Oregon. No one is proposing to to repeal that law, Scott, and you know that. I think people can be fired if their conduct gets in the way of their job, and they should be fired. If they are committing crimes, I hope that anyone in this room who knows of a pedophilic act is reporting it to the proper authorities. But to fire someone because they have a private, personal attraction to alcohol, to women, to men, to boys, as long as they never act on it, you think they should lose their job? I don't. If it interferes with the job, absolutely. But civil rights protections are meant to protect us from discrimination based on what we are, those matters over which we have no control. We have control over behavior. We do not have control over sexual orientation.
I suggest that this answer should be alarming to anyone who is doing business in the state of Oregon, that I certainly would not want to be forced by law to hire someone who, with an expressed orientation toward children, as a daycare center worker or any other type of activity in which children might be exposed. And I think that what Mr. Hinkle has conceded is that this whole idea of sexual orientation incorporates many other types of behaviors than just homosexuality. And if we base our laws on the term sexual orientation, then we will be bringing in special rights protections for many things that the vast majority of us recognize are wrong.
Mr. Hinkle, your next question.
Mr. Lively, do you perceive some threat to your personal religious faith or your sexual orientation or your lifestyle by tolerating homosexuality? If you do, what is that threat? If you don't, do you think it threatens anybody else's choices in these matters?
Well, I've heard the argument that this measure deals with a specific religious belief, and that just is not true. All world religions have restrictions against homosexuality. All nations on the face of the earth have got some types of laws that restrict homosexual behavior. I think that the fact that restrictions against homosexuality transcend religion and race and culture is an indication that the prohibitions against it were born out of human experience and not out of moral philosophy, and that it only stands to reason, especially before the advent of modern medicine, that society would want to discourage behavior that so often leads to disease and death.
Well, I asked you what the threat was to your personal religious choices and your lifestyle. You won't answer that question, but you want to talk about religion instead, so I'll talk about that. You will all be receiving your voters' pamphlets soon. There are more than a dozen major religious denominations: the Lutherans, the Methodists, the Roman Catholic Church, Archdiocese of Portland, the Disciples of Christ, the Presbyterian Church, the Episcopal Church, the American Jewish Committee, the Jewish Federation of Portland. Every principal religious leader in the city of Portland has come out against Measure 9. Do you think really, Scott, that all of these religious leaders are sinners, that they are promoting an abnormal and perverse lifestyle? The gay community has somehow taken over the entire Christian church, except for your small segment of it? I don't think so.
Mr. Lively. Mr. Lively, your next question, please.
Thank you. Mr. Hinkle, I have here the minutes from the ACLU board meeting of March 25th, 1992, in which you and Jan Carson planned to recruit plaintiffs to sue the North Clackamas School District because they allow a church to meet in the building on Sundays. How do you justify such extreme opposition to Christians being on school grounds during off hours while you actively support homosexual groups promoting their agenda in the classroom?
There is a amendment to the Constitution, Scott, called the First Amendment, and it prohibits the establishment of religion in our country. And the United States Supreme Court, speaking most recently through the three most conservative justices on the court, appointed by Reagan and Bush, said that that means what it says, that we are not to allow religious influences in the schools. As a matter of fact, when we investigated the situation in North Clackamas County, we learned that the North Clackamas School District opens its campuses to all groups on an equal basis. They have maintained a genuine public forum. They will rent their facilities to all comers on an equal basis. And as far as ACLU policy is concerned, that's fine. As long as public property is a genuine public forum and everybody is paying their way, then yes, religious groups can use school facilities. What we object to is schools allowing religious groups to use their school facilities when they don't allow other groups, or when they're not paying their fair share, the electric bill, the janitor bill, and so forth. We found that that wasn't happening in North Clackamas. There is no lawsuit.
Well, the purpose of my question in the first place was merely to make the point that the ACLU and the proponents of the gay rights agenda are very much in opposition to Christianity being represented to children in schools, and arguably Christianity is something beneficial to young people, but to expose the fact that these same people are very much accepting of promoting a lifestyle that is arguably very harmful, and that is something that is a contradiction, that it's it seems to be an error in judgment, that something that it promotes something that is good being excluded, and something that is promoting something that is bad being included.
Mr. Hinkle, your next question.
Public libraries are government property, and they are supported by government money. Your measure says that no government money and property can be used to promote homosexuality. If your measure passes, what are Oregon's librarians supposed to do to make sure that there is no book on their shelves that promotes homosexuality?
We have said repeatedly that our measure will not address what is involved in the adult library section in the public libraries. Our attorney has supported that position, citing U.S. Supreme Court cases that back it up. We are not interested in removing materials that merely are written by someone who is homosexual or address homosexuality in an adult context. Our concern has continually been books like Daddy's Roommate, which promote homosexual normalization to young people in kindergarten and preschool. This book, and Heather Has Two Mommies, have already been accepted in the New York public school system, grades 1 through 5. And I don't want them personally, and representing the majority of citizens in the state, I believe, do not want these books to be presented to our children in kindergarten and first grade. That's been our only concern on library materials.
Well, you see how the OCA has to back off from the wording of its measure. They want the courts to somehow ignore the language of the measure, which doesn't distinguish at all between adult libraries and children's libraries. It says all public property, all government property must not be used. So they are admitting, as I said in my opening remarks, that if literally applied, this measure would violate the First Amendment. As with respect to the two books that he mentioned later, Daddy Has a Roommate. The Portland Public Schools have books available that help children who are going through a divorce in their family, going through a death in their family. Books that help try to explain these social realities, help people work through their feelings on them. Daddy Has a Roommate is a book that is not available in the Portland Public Schools. It is available in bookstores around the city, I suppose. Counselors are told that here is a book that may help a child understand what is happening if he or she is growing up in a gay household. And unless the OCA is prepared to say that gays and lesbians should have their children taken away from them, then these books are maybe a helpful thing. The schools are not prescribing them. They are saying, here parents, here are books that are available if you want to use them.
Mr. Lively, your next question.
Mr. Hinkle, our community standards dictate that government, especially the schools, discourage certain behaviors like drug use, smoking, and gang activity. Shouldn't the community also have the right to require government to discourage unhealthy sexual behavior, such as sodomy?
I favor sex education in the schools, Mr. Lively, unlike you that would have the schools teaching that there are unhealthy and dangerous forms of sex activity that should be avoided. To say that homosexuality per se is a dangerous form of sex and heterosexual sex is by definition a safe form of sex is absurd. And I feel like I'm debating the Flat Earth Society when we get into this this kind of debate. There is no way to respond logically to people who think that sex between males is inherently dangerous and sex between males and females is always safe. I think people should be taught what safe sex is if there's going to be sex education in the schools at all. I'm not an expert on that, and I wouldn't want to bet my ranch on it, as someone said to me earlier, which way the schools ought to go. But by golly, if they're going to have sex education, it ought to be, here's the dangers, folks, and here's what you can do to avoid them. The best thing to do to avoid them is abstinence. I favor abstinence for most everybody, actually.
Yes. Well, I think that's really a misrepresentation of the position of many of the people who are promoting gay rights in our schools, in our culture now. And I would suggest that we consider the fact, as reported in the Oregonian in late 1991, that 86% of all new AIDS cases in 1991 were among homosexual men, and then another 7 or 8% were homosexual IV drug users. That this is something that we are encouraging our young people to view this lifestyle as if it is perfectly natural and normal, when in fact it is the leading cause or the leading factor in coming down with this always fatal disease.
Mr. Hinkle, your next question.
Is this my last one?
Yes, it is.
In your statement of legislative intent, you say that some public employees will have to be reassigned if Measure 9 passes. Who would have to be reassigned, and in light of Measure 5, where are you going to reassign them?
Well, hopefully there aren't very many teachers in the public school system now that are already promoting homosexuality to our kids. But in those instances where they are, it would be determined based on the child sitting in the classroom. If the child was more likely to begin experimenting with homosexual behavior because of the role modeling of the teacher or representations about the lifestyle made by the teacher, then that person should not be teaching the class, and that they should be in some other administrative position. And perhaps Mr. Hinkle knows more about this than I do, and that a large number of teachers are promoting homosexuality to our children, and if that's the case, then that's something we should all be very concerned about.
You have defined promoting homosexuality as marching in a gay rights parade, advocating gay rights, writing a letter to the editor that supports gay rights. You have defined encouraging homosexuality to simply be a gay person who says, yes, I am gay, this is who I am, and I am a responsible citizen. I am a responsible role model. So any gay teacher who lets himself or herself be known publicly as a gay rights advocate, you don't even have to be gay, to do that. But anybody who is a gay rights advocate, anybody who supports gays in job discrimination, anyone who marches in a gay rights parade becomes an advocate and encourager of homosexuality. By your definition, those are the people who are going to have to be reassigned. And yes, Mr. Lively, there are a lot of them.
Mr. Lively, your final question, please.
Mr. Hinkle, if a young man were to begin experimenting with homosexuality based on assurances that homosexuality is a normal alternative lifestyle by Governor Barbara Roberts and other public officials, and this young man subsequently contracted AIDS, would you support the right of this man to bring a lawsuit against the state for failure to properly disclose the relationship between homosexual behavior and AIDS?
As I said a moment ago, I think if there's going to be AIDS education in the schools, it ought to be thorough and truthful. And people ought to be told that they can contract AIDS through heterosexual sex, through homosexual sex, through drug use, and through perhaps other means as well, whatever the current best scientific and medical evidence is. I'm in favor of the truth, Mr. Lively. I'm in favor of full disclosure. I'm in favor of education. I'm in favor of tolerance, and I'm in favor of honesty. So I'm not in favor of lawsuits, even though I'm a lawyer. I don't think people should sue the governor because she didn't tell them not to have heterosexual sex, and I don't think they should sue the governor if she didn't tell them not to have homosexual sex.
Again, my question was to make a point that we have across our state many public officials who are advocating the gay rights position across our state. And even as we speak, there are tens of thousands of young people who are absorbing their views about the world based on these role models. Young people are going to begin experimenting with homosexual behavior based on the belief that it's a perfectly normal, acceptable choice to make. And some of those kids are going to acquire AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases just as a matter of the statistics. And that I suggest that we should be much more responsible in our public policy to tolerate the right of people to participate in private behavior of their choice in the privacy of their bedroom, but not to allow them to bring it out into the public and demand special minority status for it.
We'll now move to the portion of our program which consists of questions from our City Club panel seated up here at the table to my right. I'll turn the program over to the panelists Joanne Allen and Alan Hunt. Each speaker will have 1 minute to respond to the question asked, after which the other speaker will have 1 minute to rebut. The first question for Mr. Hinkle will come from Joanne Allen.
Mr. Hinkle, I am a grade school counselor, and a 9-year-old comes to me and says his mother or father is gay, and he doesn't know what to think about it. If ballot measure 9 passes, am I required to teach that child that his parent is a pervert and unnatural? If not, what does ballot measure 9 require of me?
Well, I think that's one point on which both sides would agree. The answer to that is yes, that is what Measure 9 requires. Every school teacher, in addressing his or her children, whether you're a counselor or any other official in a public school, if a child comes to you and says, my brother is gay, my sister is a lesbian, my mother is a lesbian, the first reaction must be they are engaged in conduct that is abnormal, perverse, unnatural, and wrong. You are living in an immoral household. That is what the OCA wants. They want their religious perspective taught in the public schools to every child who may find himself or herself in this kind of situation. The suicide rate for young people who are themselves gay and lesbian is already very high. Can you imagine what it's going to be after this measure takes effect and the schools are teaching children that their parents, their siblings, are immoral, perverse, and wrong?
Really, that position is simply absurd. If you were to translate that position into how teachers would have to deal with parents that were involved in over drinking or using drugs, then we would have severely traumatized children all over the city. That's not the case. Teachers know how to translate a community standard into language the children can understand that is not going to traumatize the children at all. And I think it's illogical and a misrepresentation to believe that we want people to tell children that their relatives that are involved in homosexuality are some kind of monsters.
Mr. Lively, why should laws protect persons on the basis of their religious preferences, which are chosen behaviors, and not protect persons on the basis of their sexual preferences?
Well, the Founding Fathers saw fit to establish a protection for religion in the early part of this country, and that is the only category that deviates from a minority premise of getting minority status that would be based on how you were born. I think that the reason we're opposed to granting special rights based on homosexuality is because it's a voluntary behavior, and that we don't believe that people should be able to use the coercive power of government to enforce how they decide to have sex.
Divorce is voluntary behavior. Adultery is voluntary behavior. It is illegal in Oregon to fire a person because you are divorced. It is illegal in Oregon to fire a person because you commit adultery. Mr. Lively said earlier he doesn't think that creates special rights for divorced people. He won't tell us what the difference is. He won't tell us what the difference is. And I want to go back to that earlier question about the public school teacher. His response was the most astonishing thing I've heard. I want you all to read Measure 9, for heaven's sake. Read it. Every public school shall assist in setting a standard that recognizes homosexuality as abnormal, wrong, unnatural, and perverse. Those are their words. And if the school teachers aren't supposed to use the words that are in the Constitution, that the Constitution requires them to use when a person comes in and says he has a gay parent, what are they supposed to do? What does this thing mean? They keep backing away from the consequences of this terrible measure.
Mr. Hinkle, the two populations experiencing the fastest growth in cases of AIDS are heterosexual women and infants. How would this measure affect government funding for AIDS education, treatment, and research?
Apparently, in the OCA's view, mention of AIDS and health education classes concerning AIDS is a way of promoting homosexuality. If that is how the courts interpret it, and based on their legislative history statements of today, that may well be the case, then state funding for AIDS education in the schools or community groups, health clinics, the University of Oregon Health Sciences Center, any public agency that is involved in AIDS education may indeed have its funding cut. I don't know what they think that will accomplish except to increase the number of AIDS cases in Oregon. We don't know how the courts will interpret this. As I said at the beginning, this measure is so vague and so broadly worded that nobody really knows what it means. No state has ever passed a measure like this, so we have no precedent to rely on. But that is certainly one danger.
Charlie, you're creating stands that we're supposedly trying to take and then saying we're backing away from them. That's absolutely false. If you were to attempt to interpret the Bill of Rights with the same kind of scrutiny that you're putting on this measure, then we logically would have to allow homeowners to keep a .50 caliber machine gun nest in their front yard under the Second Amendment. Obviously, when you have constitutional law that is setting basically a broad standard, then it requires a legislative enactment afterwards. That's what constitutional law does. Every time you pass a constitutional law, it goes to the legislature to be backed up by statutory law. And if anyone believes that the Oregon legislature is going to support some of the things that Charles Hinkle is saying that we would like to have happen, they don't know the Oregon legislature.
Mr. Lively, because most organizations do not want to be associated with a state which selectively discriminates against some of its citizens, it is estimated that this measure may cost Oregonians many jobs, in fact, many more jobs than the spotted owl. Losses are already threatened in the convention trade, tourism, movie production, and business trade. How would the thousands of Oregonians who lose their means of livelihood be compensated if Measure 9 passes?
Once again, that's a pure fabrication. The idea that people are going to stay away from Oregon because we've taken a stand in favor of family values and against militant homosexuality, please, if you really believe that Oregon is going to be hurt by taking a stand for family values instead of a stand in favor of militant homosexuality, then you're nuts. And you only have to look to Springfield, the city of Springfield, Oregon, where we passed this measure earlier this year, and the mayor himself was on TV last week saying that we had now received a substantial number more letters positive from around the country than negative, and that building permits and employment is up in Springfield, not down.
Well, the Portland Visitor Center and Convention Association is not an arm of the militant homosexual community. And they tell us the facts that I said earlier. 5 conventions already have been canceled. We know what has happened in Louisiana. We know what has happened in Arizona. Let me just mention Arizona. Something like $350 million worth of business has been lost there already. And the only thing that Arizona did was simply not recognize Martin Luther King Day. Oregon is amending its constitution to declare a class of citizens abnormal, perverse, unnatural. What do you think the reception for Oregon products around the country, from wine to pears to salmon to crab, is going to be when that measure passes? You can say goodbye to the film industry in Oregon. You can certainly say goodbye to most of the convention business in Oregon, and tourism will obviously be cut as well. The day that Springfield becomes a tourist and convention mecca will, I will be glad to eat my hat.
Mr. Hinkle, assume I am licensed by the state of Oregon. I am an attorney, physician, medical technician, realtor, insurance agent, securities brokers, CPA, or building contractor, and I advertise in a gay publication. Can I lose my license if ballot measure 9 passes?
Well, Mr. Lively will say no because measure 9 doesn't mean anything. But if measure 9 means what it says, it means that government property and money, which is what it says, cannot be used in any way to promote homosexuality. If you are a person who holds a state license, who publishes, who advertises in a gay community paper, and who thereby is supporting the gay rights movement and encouraging homosexuality, of course that it is at least arguable that you are therefore using a government license, a piece of government property. More than that, for countless professions in Oregon, a prerequisite to licensure is good moral character. To be a lawyer, you have to be have a good moral character. To be a podiatrist, you have to be. Medical doctors, the list goes on and on. When the Constitution of the state says to you, you are abnormal, perverse, wrong, and unnatural, how can you possibly argue that you have good moral character? There are going to be countless lawyers and doctors and other professionals whose licenses are at risk because under the OCA's view, by promoting and encouraging homosexuality, we are not of good moral character.
Once again, we have never taken that position. It's a pure fabrication by our opponents. What we're concerned about is, and let me explain it to you in the reverse. Rabbi Levin was here from New York the other day. He attempted to keep the gay rights laws out of New York City in 1986, and he failed. If Rabbi Levin refuses to rent the other half of his 2-family home to a couple of militant gays from Queer Nation, he could be hauled before the Human Rights Commission, fined multiple thousands of dollars, and be subject to having to take gay sensitivity training. That's the kind of thing that we've seen. There's a case in Minnesota which a young woman was forced or refused to have a lesbian roommate in her dormitory. She was then called before the Human Rights Commission, fined $6,000 and forced to go through gay sensitivity training. We don't support that type of activity in our philosophy.
Mr. Lively, this measure requires that governments and schools educate youth that sadism, masochism, and homosexuality are wrong. How much is it going to cost to have this curriculum developed and taught? And would a child be excused from this curriculum if the parent believed that it was discriminatory?
Well, I think that anything that would happen with this measure in the schools would be very easily integrated into policies that already exist to deal with drug use and other types of things that we discourage by our community standards.
The OCA wants to increase sex education in the schools in a way that will be precedent-setting. I don't want to comment further on that one. I want to go back to his prior answer. Remember what I said in my opening statements about falsehoods and distortions. The Minnesota case that he's referring to is actually a Wisconsin case, and it is referred to in the voters pamphlet. You will see it in a voters pamphlet material submitted by an outfit called American Family Association Foundation, where they go through this litany: the fine, the order to write letter of apology, forced to attend sensitivity training, and so forth. What they don't tell you is that the Wisconsin Human Rights Commission in July 1992 reversed that decision, said that the Wisconsin law had been misapplied and misunderstood. It does not apply to roommates. There was no fine. There was no sensitivity training. There was no violation of the law. The case was dismissed. That event occurred 2 months before the so-called American Family Association submitted its statement to the voters pamphlet. That is another lie, another distortion. Honesty is apparently not a family value.
Mr. Hinkle, considerable work is being done by the scientific community to test the theory that homosexuality is genetically based rather than behavioral. If this theory proves to be true and Measure 9 passes, how will the law be affected?
Well, there is a debate in the courts as to whether immutability, that is something that cannot be changed, something that is not a matter of choice, is a necessary prerequisite for certain kinds of equal protection claims. Certainly, if it is scientifically established that homosexuality is indeed immutable or inherent or biological somehow, then obviously that will put it in the same class as race or sex, a characteristic over which you have no control that you were born with. Whether or not you were born with it, it is certainly a matter, by all scientific indications, a matter that is determined at a very early age and over which none of us has any choice. I always like to put the question to you. When was it that you made your choice in the matter, and what were the factors that you took into account? Did you make a list of all the benefits that come to you from being gay in our society, and to have to endure the opprobrium and the hostility of people like the OCA, and you put down all these wonderful benefits that you get from being gay, and you weighed them against all the benefits from being heterosexual, and you said, gee, I guess I'll choose this one. The whole concept is nonsense. It is not a matter of choice. It is a red herring.
I think that there's enough evidence even in our own community here that homosexuality is an unlearnable behavior just by the number of people who have left the homosexual lifestyle and now are married with families. The studies that are being referred to are very much politically based studies. Simon LeVay, who did the first one, the hypothalamus, is a gay rights activist who left the Salk Institute to found a gay and lesbian educational, some type of school. I have a picture of him in my office standing in front of the school with one of his homosexual partners. The other genetic study, I have seen the refutation of that in the refutation of that genetic study in scientific journals. Neither of them are conclusive. There is no proof that homosexuality is an innate behavior, and the fact that so many people have left the lifestyle demonstrates that it can be unlearned.
Mr. Lively, the opponents of Measure 9 contend that it would take away civil rights, not special rights, of homosexuals and their supporters. They believe it would promote discrimination against homosexuals who do not currently enjoy any special rights. How do you respond to this?
Well, I am not, I guess to explain that, I'd turn to the Portland Future Focus document. The gay rights people in this community are continually saying that they're not trying to get affirmative action and hiring guidelines, which we consider special rights in the case of giving it to a behavior. And yet, that is exactly what the City Council has given them. To read it verbatim, they're to implement a revised affirmative action plan that will make the city a leader in affirmative action. The plan will include guidelines for hiring all levels of city and county staff and volunteer boards, and even to have personnel reviews that should include performance evaluations by managers. And that's something that I think is they're condemned out of their own mouths in that this is in black and white. They are asking for affirmative action, and I don't think people should have affirmative action based on how they have sex.
You notice in the sentence that he read, there was no mention of homosexuality, no mention of sexual orientation. He is taking out of context statements on page 55 and tying them together with statements on page 65 and deducing something that is out of context. I favor fair employment practices. Nobody in the history of the Oregon gay rights movement, and I've been a part of it from the very beginning. I've testified, I think, in every legislative session. I've drafted many of the bills and been participated in the drafting, I think, of all of them. None of them has ever called for affirmative action. None of them has ever called for the establishment of quotas. Portland Future Focus doesn't. It is a red herring. By their admission, gay and lesbian persons are everywhere. They are wealthy, you know. I mean, their statistics that they like to show are that this is a terribly intrusive minority that is controlling our religious institutions and our newspapers and so forth. Well, you don't need affirmative action, friends, when you're already in control.
We have time for one final question from our panelists.
Mr. Hinkle, how can our government justify spending any money to recognize a homosexual lifestyle as legitimate, given that this lifestyle is not acceptable to some citizens?
I don't think government spends any money to recognize a lifestyle. I object to the word lifestyle. Among gays and lesbians, there are plumbers and drunkards and alcoholics and college presidents and neurosurgeons and lawyers and doctors and OCA members. Among the heterosexual community, there are drunkards and alcoholics and plumbers and electricians and college presidents and doctors and lawyers and baseball players and so forth. Lifestyle has nothing to do with your sexual orientation. Lifestyle is what kind of job you've got and what kind of family you've got and where you like to go to eat when you go out to eat and so forth. You know, it is not promoting a lifestyle. Education for children who find themselves with a sexual orientation that makes them the butt of ridicule and opprobrium, I think counseling in the schools should be available to children to tell them, yes, maybe life is worth living. Yes, maybe you can be a decent citizen even though you are gay and lesbian. Yes, maybe you don't have to contemplate suicide. That's what the OCA wants out of the schools. They want every gay and lesbian child who comes through the Portland school system to be told they're wrong, they're immoral, they're perverse, and I think that's outrageous.
Well, I think it's absurd to suggest that homosexuality is not a lifestyle. This is the first group of people in our history that has ever defined themselves based on their private sexual practices. They want you to know, first and foremost, before anything else, I'm gay, which means I participate in one or more forms of sodomy in the privacy of my bedroom. They want you to know that right up front. I'm suggesting that we should go back to a time in our culture in which what people do in the privacy of their own business is their own business and is not put forward as a condition for some type of government status or part of the curriculum of our schools. The Right to Privacy PAC, largest group promoting homosexuality in the state, is a misnomer. If they want privacy, why don't they keep it private?
Mr. Lively, you've made your views very clear on homosexuality. What I'd like to ask you at this time is, if the measure is defeated, then what do you think will happen, and particularly in the area of the special rights that you're so concerned about?
Well, I think that if the measure is defeated, that we will see the same types of laws that have been passed in Oregon, in Portland, and the domestic partnerships thing that happened in Multnomah County, all across the state, that we will see the pro-gay school curriculum being put into effect, things like Project 10, and when you talk about, no, I'll save that for later, I think that what you'll have is Oregon being a magnet for militant gays from across the country, just as San Francisco became a magnet when it identified itself as a pro-gay community. And I don't want Oregon to become another Castro community.
I don't know the difference between I guess the difference between a militant homosexual and others is that the others are invisible. And that's what the OCA wants. The OCA wants gay and lesbian persons simply to disappear, to shut up about themselves, to stop asking for equal rights. That's not America. I think that it's now 6 states who have gay rights statutes on the book that give equal rights to gays and lesbians in employment and housing. Have they all become meccas for the militant homosexuals? We're going to have to start competing, I guess, to get the most militant homosexuals we can. Wisconsin is not a haven for militant homosexuals. It has had its law in the books for 10 years. And they would like you to think that it leads to extreme interpretations. But as I said earlier, those accusations are distortions. What the gay rights movement wants is equal treatment. What the gay rights movement wants is fairness. What the gay rights movement wants is a removal of discrimination. That's all that they want.
That concludes our questions. We'll now move to the final portion of the program. 3-minute closing statements from each speaker. We'll begin with Mr. Hinkle, followed by Mr. Lively.
Like all other human beings, gay and lesbian persons have the power of choice over many things: what faith to follow, what political party to support, whether to contribute to our community or to be passive observers. But also, like all other humans, gay and lesbians have no power to choose with respect to their sexual orientation. And now the OCA wants to make sure that, unlike other humans, gays and lesbians have no power of choice over where to work or where to live. For Measure 9 will guarantee that every employer and every property owner can continue to refuse to hire or rent to a person simply because of the person's sexual orientation. This unprecedented attempt to take away constitutional rights from one group of citizens, to brand them abnormal, unnatural, perverse, and wrong, this Measure 9 is like a pile of stones waiting to be thrown. Every yes vote will be a stone thrown at our economy, at our tourist and convention industry, and at every Oregon business that markets its products in the national market. Every yes vote will be a stone thrown at our religious communities, all those churches and synagogues whose tax exemptions might be in jeopardy because they favor civil rights protection for gays and lesbians, and in the OCA's view, that means they are promoting homosexuality. Every yes vote will be a stone thrown at Oregon schools and libraries, where books will be censored and teachers will be forbidden to speak about gay and lesbian persons or to their gay and lesbian students in any terms other than moral condemnation. But most of all, every yes vote for Measure 9 will be a stone thrown at your gay and lesbian friends and neighbors, brothers and sisters, parents and children, every gay and lesbian person you know, where you work, where you go to school, where you shop, where you worship. Jesus of Nazareth, who said not one word on the subject of homosexuality, but who had a great deal to say about the sins of pride and moral arrogance and hypocrisy, Jesus of Nazareth said, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." The God that you and I profess to believe in, Scott, loves each one of his children equally, and he calls each one of us equally to follow a path of justice and mercy and love and compassion. So my appeal to you today, Scott, in the name of our common humanity, is to put down your stone, to join with us in a common effort to build a better Oregon, where no man or woman is a second-class citizen, where no man or woman must live in a climate of fear and hostility, where no man or woman is branded as unworthy of constitutional protection. Put down your stone, Scott, and join me in saying no to Measure 9.
Well, the only stone that I have in my possession is one that I picked up off the floor of a storefront in Eugene that had been tossed through the window by an activist from the other side of this issue. It was wrapped with a photocopy of an ad that the business had put out in our newspaper, and it had swastikas written all over it, and it said, it talked about people who oppose homosexuality being Nazis and hate mongers. That's the only stone that I have. I have a great deal of compassion for people that I believe are trapped in a dysfunctional lifestyle, and I have respect for them as individuals. I am opposed to their behavior, and I think that the majority of the citizens of the state of Oregon agree with me on that position. The homosexuals in this state and across the country have the same rights as anyone else under the Constitution now. They have the right to vote. They have the right to travel, to own property. What they're asking for is special rights based on their behavior. If you take away what they're being involved with in the privacy of their bedroom, there's no difference between them and anyone else, and they shouldn't be extended special civil rights protections based on that criteria. The arguments that are being proposed for the defeat of this measure are very, very similar to the arguments that were proposed to defeat ballot measure 8 in 1988.